I never thought my suburban nightmare would begin with a letter about rock salt. But there I was on a freezing January morning in 2025, standing in my driveway in Columbus, Ohio, holding the most absurd piece of paper I had ever received. My name is Andrew Thompson, and I had just finished spreading salt across my driveway after a brutal winter storm dumped 8 inches of snow on our neighborhood overnight. I was sipping my coffee, watching the ice crystals melt into harmless puddles, when my neighbor Janet rushed over with a bright yellow envelope that had been taped to my mailbox. "Did you get one too?" she asked, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. I tore open the envelope and read the typed letter inside. It was from the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and the message made my blood boil despite the 20-degree temperature. Effective immediately, all use of salt, rock salt, calcium chloride, or any ice-melting chemicals on driveways, walkways, or any property surfaces was strictly prohibited. Violation of this new rule would result in a $500 fine per incident. "This is insane," I muttered, looking at the fresh layer of salt I had just spread across my driveway. "How are we supposed to keep our properties safe during winter?" Janet shook her head, her face red from both cold and anger. "Apparently, the HOA president is concerned about environmental damage to the landscaping and the decorative stones they installed along the sidewalks last fall. Sharon Bartlett sent an email last night explaining that salt runoff is destroying the aesthetic value of the community." Sharon Bartlett. Of course, the woman had been a thorn in my side since I moved into this neighborhood 3 years ago. She was the stereotypical HOA president who treated our suburban street like her personal kingdom. Every blade of grass had to be the exact approved height. Every house had to display the correct seasonal decorations during designated periods. And now, apparently, our safety during winter storms was less important than her precious decorative rocks. I crumpled the letter in my fist. "This cannot be legal. We have a responsibility to maintain safe access to our homes." "Try telling that to Sharon," Janet said. "Last month she fined the Hendersons $300 because their Christmas wreath had the wrong shade of red ribbon." I spent the rest of that morning researching Ohio HOA laws and winter maintenance requirements. What I discovered was both encouraging and frustrating. While HOAs in Ohio have broad authority to establish community rules, they cannot enforce regulations that create hazardous conditions or violate state safety codes. Property owners have a legal duty to maintain safe access, and in winter conditions, that typically means using ice melt or salt. I drafted a carefully worded email to Sharon and the HOA board, citing the relevant Ohio revised code sections, and pointing out that banning salt could expose both homeowners and the HOA itself to liability if someone was injured on unsalted ice. I explained that we could explore more environmentally friendly ice melt options, but a complete ban was unreasonable and potentially dangerous. The response came within 2 hours. Sharon's email was curt and condescending, stating that the board had consulted with their attorney and the rule would stand. Any homeowner who disagreed was welcome to attend the next board meeting in 3 weeks, but until then, violations would be enforced with the full authority of the HOA covenants. I was not going to wait 3 weeks. That afternoon, I contacted 5 other homeowners who were equally outraged by the salt ban. We formed a quick alliance and began preparing our arguments for an emergency board meeting. Tom Martinez, who lived 2 streets over, was a retired civil engineer who had extensive experience with winter road safety. His wife Maria worked as a personal injury attorney. The Chens, a young couple with twin toddlers, were terrified about keeping their walkway safe. And Robert Hayes, an elderly veteran who lived alone, was worried about falling on his own property. We submitted a formal request for an emergency HOA meeting, which, according to the bylaws, the board was required to schedule within 7 business days if at least 5 homeowners signed the petition. Sharon was not pleased. She called me directly that evening, her voice dripping with fake sweetness that barely concealed her irritation. "Andrew, I received your little petition," she said. "I want you to understand that this board takes environmental concerns very seriously. The landscaping company has documented severe damage to the common area plantings from salt runoff." "Sharon, people's safety is more important than shrubs," I replied, keeping my tone level. "We're talking about preventing broken bones and head injuries. The board has determined that homeowners can use sand or kitty litter for traction," she said. "That's perfectly adequate." "Sand and kitty litter do not melt ice," I explained, as if talking to a child. "They only provide temporary traction, and they're far less effective than salt. This rule puts everyone at risk. The decision is final, Andrew. I suggest you accept it and move on. Your emergency meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday at 7 in the evening at the community center." She hung up before I could respond. The week leading up to the meeting was tense. Another winter storm hit Columbus on Friday, and I watched my neighbors struggle with the ridiculous sand-only policy. Old Robert Hayes fell on his front steps and bruised his hip badly enough to need a doctor's visit. The Chen's babysitter refused to come to their house because the walkway was too dangerous. Even Janet, who tried to comply with the rules, ended up spreading salt late at night because her teenage daughter nearly broke her ankle on the icy driveway. I documented everything. Photos, incident reports, weather conditions, and testimony from neighbors about near misses and actual falls. Maria Martinez helped me compile a legal brief outlining our position and the potential liability issues. Tuesday evening arrived with bitter cold and clear skies. The community center parking lot was a treacherous sheet of ice because, of course, the HOA had not salted it. I watched Sharon Bartlett arrive in her white Mercedes SUV, parking in the spot closest to the door. She wore expensive snow boots and a designer coat, and she picked her way across the ice with exaggerated care, clutching the arm of Vice President Patricia Dennison. Inside, about 30 homeowners had gathered, which was the largest turnout for an HOA meeting in years. The usual board meetings attracted maybe 5 people who had nothing better to do. Tonight, the room buzzed with angry conversations. Sharon called the meeting to order with her usual self-important ceremony. She sat at the head table with Patricia and the other board members, Treasurer Mark Sullivan, Secretary Linda Wu, and at-large member Craig Roberts. They looked like a corporate board preparing to deny a factory worker's petition. "Before we begin with the emergency petition," Sharon announced, "I want to remind everyone that this board was elected by the community to make decisions in the best interest of Willowbrook Estates as a whole. We have researched this issue thoroughly, and our position is based on sound environmental principles and professional advice." "Professional advice from whom?" Tom Martinez called out. "Because I spent 30 years as a civil engineer, and I can tell you that banning ice melt in a climate like Ohio's is negligent." Sharon's smile tightened. "Our landscaping consultant has provided extensive documentation about salt damage." "Your landscaping consultant is not a safety expert," Tom shot back. "I am. And I'm telling you that someone is going to get seriously hurt." The meeting devolved into heated arguments. Maria Martinez presented her legal concerns about liability. I showed photos of the hazardous conditions on our properties. Robert Hayes described his fall and showed the bruises on his hip, which made several people gasp. The Chens talked about being unable to safely access their own home with their toddlers. Sharon remained unmoved. She countered every argument with vague references to environmental responsibility and property values. When pressed for specific data about the alleged damage, she produced a brief report from a landscaping company that basically said salt can harm plants if used excessively, which everyone already knew. The solution is simple, Patricia Dennison added. Use sand or kitty litter for traction and shovel more frequently. Many communities in colder climates have successfully implemented similar restrictions. Which communities? I demanded. Name one HOA in Ohio that completely bans ice melt. Patricia could not provide an answer. Neither could Sharon. The board called for a vote on whether to rescind the salt ban. It failed 3-2, with Sharon, Patricia, and Craig voting to maintain the rule, while Linda and Mark voted to rescind it. Linda, bless her, had actually listened to our concerns. Mark, I suspected, just wanted to avoid potential lawsuits. Sharon gavelled the meeting to a close, her expression triumphant. The salt ban remains in effect. This meeting is adjourned. As we filed out into the cold night, I felt defeated but not broken. Maria pulled me aside in the parking lot. We have options, she said quietly. HOA rules can be challenged in court if they are unreasonable or create hazardous conditions. It would cost money and time, but we could win. How much money are we talking about? I asked. Several $1,000s at minimum, possibly more if it drags out. We would need to pool resources. I looked around at my neighbors, many of whom were struggling to cross the icy parking lot. These were not wealthy people. We were middle-class families trying to live our lives without harassment from a petty tyrant with too much power and too little sense. Let me think about it, I said. Maybe we can find another way. That other way arrived sooner than I expected, and in the worst possible manner. 3 days after the meeting, Columbus was hit by a massive winter storm that meteorologists had been tracking for a week. The temperature dropped to 15 degrees. Freezing rain coated everything in a thick layer of ice, and then 6 inches of snow fell on top of it. It was the kind of winter weather that made going outside genuinely dangerous. I woke up at 6 in the morning to the sound of snow plows rumbling down the main road. My driveway was buried under snow and ice, and I knew the layer underneath would be treacherous. I also knew that Sharon and her board spies would be watching for anyone who violated the salt ban. I made a decision. My safety and my family's safety when they visited was more important than Sharon's rules. I went to my garage, grabbed the bag of rock salt I had kept hidden, and spread it liberally across my driveway and walkway. If they wanted to fine me, so be it. I would pay the fine and challenge it in court if necessary. By noon, the salt had done its job. My driveway was clear and safe, while my neighbors who had followed the rules struggled with ice-covered surfaces that were barely passable even with sand. I was eating lunch when I heard the commotion outside. Voices were shouting, and someone was calling for help. I ran to my front window and saw a crowd gathering near the mailboxes at the end of our cul-de-sac. I grabbed my coat and rushed outside, my boots crunching on the salted driveway. As I got closer, I saw Sharon Bartlett lying on the ground, her face contorted in pain, clutching her left arm. Patricia Dennison was kneeling beside her, talking on her phone to what sounded like emergency services. What happened? I asked Janet, who stood at the edge of the gathering crowd. Sharon was going door to door in her car, documenting who cleared their driveways, Janet whispered. She parked near the mailboxes and got out to take photos. She slipped on the ice near her own car and went down hard. I think she broke her arm. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. I did not want anyone to get hurt, not even Sharon. But the irony was not lost on me or anyone else present. The woman who had banned salt on safety grounds had injured herself on ice that could have been prevented with the very substance she prohibited. The ambulance arrived within 15 minutes. The EMTs carefully loaded Sharon onto a stretcher, her face pale and pinched with pain. As they wheeled her past where I stood, she locked eyes with me. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You people made the parking area unsafe with your salt runoff. I'm suing every single one of you." I was too stunned to respond. Patricia climbed into the ambulance with Sharon, shooting accusatory glares at all of us before the doors closed. The neighborhood was silent after the ambulance left. We all stood in the cold, processing what had just happened and what Sharon had threatened. "She cannot be serious," Tom Martinez said. "She fell on unsalted ice. How is that our fault?" "Because she's Sharon," Robert Hayes replied grimly. "She will find a way to blame us. She always does." He was right. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from a law firm in downtown Columbus. Sharon Bartlett, in her capacity as HOA president and as an individual, was filing a lawsuit against 12 homeowners, including me, for creating hazardous conditions that led to her injury. The lawsuit claimed that our use of salt in violation of HOA rules had created runoff that made the common areas, specifically the mailbox area, more dangerous than it would have been otherwise. The lawsuit sought $50,000 in damages for medical expenses, pain and suffering, and lost wages from her job as a real estate agent. It also sought an injunction to enforce the salt ban and additional fines for our violations. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the legal documents with growing disbelief and anger. The lawsuit was absurd on its face. Sharon had slipped on ice that existed because salt was not used, not because it was. The mailbox area was a common space that the HOA was responsible for maintaining, and they had failed to maintain it safely because of their own ridiculous rule. I called Maria Martinez immediately. She had received the same lawsuit papers. "This is the stupidest thing I have ever seen in my legal career," Maria said, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. "She's essentially suing us for not preventing her from implementing a policy that caused her injury. It's circular logic at its finest." "Can she win?" I asked. "Not on the merits, no, but she can make our lives miserable and cost us money in legal fees. That might be the point. Sharon strikes me as vindictive enough to pursue this just to punish us for challenging her authority. So what do? We fight it, and we countersue. The HOA has liability insurance, and Sharon's actions have created exposure for the association. The insurance company is not going to be happy about this." Maria was right about the insurance company. Within days of the lawsuit being filed, the HOA's liability insurance carrier sent their own attorney to investigate. They interviewed the 12 homeowners named in the lawsuit, reviewed the HOA meeting minutes, examined the salt ban policy, and inspected the accident site. Their conclusion was damning for Sharon. The insurance company's attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Foster, explained it to us in a meeting at Maria's home office. The HOA's insurance policy does not cover lawsuits arising from injuries caused by the HOA's own policy decisions, especially when those policies create hazardous conditions, Rebecca explained. The carrier is denying coverage for this lawsuit. Sharon Bartlett is on her own financially, and if you countersue the HOA, the insurance will likely cover that because the HOA's negligent policy created the dangerous condition. So Sharon is paying for this lawsuit out of her own pocket, Tom asked. Correct. And if she loses, she could be personally liable for your attorney fees and costs, plus any damages from a countersuit. This changed the equation entirely. Sharon had apparently assumed the HOA insurance would cover her legal crusade. She had not counted on the insurance company reviewing the situation and determining that her own policy created the liability. We filed a motion to dismiss Sharon's lawsuit on the grounds that it was frivolous and legally baseless. We also filed a countersuit against both Sharon personally and the HOA as an entity, alleging that the salt ban created negligent and hazardous conditions that violated Ohio safety codes and HOA members' rights. The legal battle that followed consumed the next 3 months. Sharon refused to back down, insisting that she was right and that we were responsible for her broken arm. Her own attorney, I learned later, had advised her to drop the lawsuit, but she fired him and hired a new one who was willing to continue the fight. Discovery was brutal for Sharon's case. The depositions revealed that the salt ban had been her idea alone, pushed through over objections from other board members. Linda Wu testified that she had raised safety concerns at the board meeting where the ban was proposed, but Sharon had dismissed them. Mark Sullivan testified that he had warned about potential liability issues. Most damaging was the landscaping company's testimony. Their representative admitted under oath that they had not recommended a complete salt ban. They had simply suggested that homeowners avoid excessive salt use near certain plantings. Sharon had taken their mild suggestion and turned it into an absolute prohibition without consulting them further. The HOA's attorney, representing the association in the countersuit, worked to distance the HOA from Sharon's personal decisions. They argued that Sharon had exceeded her authority and acted outside the scope of her duties as president. The other board members submitted statements supporting this position. Sharon became increasingly isolated. At the next HOA election, which occurred in April, she was voted out as president by a landslide. Linda Wu was elected as the new president, with Tom Martinez as vice president. One of their first acts was to formally rescind the salt ban and issue an apology to the community for the unsafe conditions it had created. The lawsuit stumbled forward until late May, when the judge finally issued a ruling on our motion to dismiss. He granted it, dismissing Sharon's lawsuit entirely and ordering her to pay our legal fees. His written opinion was scathing, stating that the lawsuit was without merit and borders on frivolous, and that a plaintiff cannot create a hazardous condition through policy decisions and then hold others liable for injuries resulting from that very hazard. The judge also issued a preliminary ruling in our favor on the countersuit, finding that the salt ban had indeed created negligent conditions, and that Sharon, as the primary architect and enforcer of the policy, bore personal liability for injuries and damages resulting from it. Sharon's new attorney withdrew from the case the day after the ruling. She was now facing a countersuit without legal representation and without insurance coverage, with a judge who had already indicated he found her position unreasonable. 2 weeks later, Sharon's current attorney contacted Maria to discuss settlement. Sharon wanted to settle the countersuit and make it all go away. The negotiation was tense, but we eventually reached an agreement. Sharon would pay $15,000 to be distributed among the homeowners who had incurred medical expenses, legal fees, and other damages from the salt ban. Robert Hayes got $5,000 for his medical bills and pain and suffering from his fall. The rest was split among the other 11 defendants to cover our legal costs. Sharon also had to resign from the HOA board entirely and agree not to seek any HOA leadership position for 5 years. She was required to send a written apology to every homeowner in Willowbrook Estates, acknowledging that the salt ban was ill-advised and unsafe. The settlement was finalized in July. I stood in Maria's office, signing the final papers, feeling a sense of relief mixed with exhaustion. The whole ordeal had taken 6 months from that first ridiculous letter about salt to the final settlement agreement. "I still cannot believe she actually sued us," I said, shaking my head. Maria laughed. "I have been practicing law for 15 years, and this is definitely in my top 5 most absurd cases. The only thing more ridiculous than banning salt in Ohio winter was suing people for not following the ban that caused your injury." "You think she learned anything from this?" Tom asked. "People like Sharon rarely learn," Maria replied, "but at least she cannot inflict her lessons on the rest of us anymore." The aftermath of the settlement was interesting to watch. Sharon's behavior in the neighborhood changed dramatically. She kept to herself, rarely attending community events. Her husband, who had been mostly absent during the whole fiasco, was rumored to be deeply unhappy about the $15,000 payout and the legal fees she had incurred. The new HOA board under Linda Wu's leadership was refreshingly reasonable. They established clear, sensible rules about winter maintenance that encouraged safe ice removal while promoting environmentally responsible practices. They recommended using calcium chloride, which is less harmful to plants than rock salt, and they organized a group purchase program so homeowners could buy it at a discount. They also implemented a proper winter maintenance schedule for all common areas, hiring a professional service to keep walkways, the mailbox area, and the community center parking lot clear and safe. The cost was minimal when spread across all the homeowners, and it eliminated the liability issues that Sharon's negligent policy had created. Robert Hayes recovered from his fall, though he walked with a slight limp for months afterward. The Chens were relieved to finally have safe access to their home during winter weather. Janet started dating the snow removal service owner, which became the subject of friendly neighborhood gossip. As for me, I learned several valuable lessons from the experience. First, HOA rules are not absolute law and can be challenged when they are unreasonable or create safety hazards. Second, standing up to petty tyrants is worth the effort, even when it is uncomfortable and expensive. Third, sometimes karma works in mysterious and ironic ways. The following winter came around, and the first major snowstorm hit Columbus in early December. I stood in my driveway, spreading calcium chloride ice melt without fear of fines or lawsuits. The white granules scattered across the concrete, already beginning their chemical work of melting the ice and making my property safe. Across the street, I saw Sharon's husband doing the same thing. Sharon was not outside, but I saw her watching from the window, and for just a moment, our eyes met. She turned away quickly, disappearing into the interior of her house. I finished treating my driveway and went back inside to the warmth of my home. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Martinez. "HOA meeting tonight, 7 at the community center. Discussing community decorations for the holidays. Linda promises it will be quick and painless." I smiled and typed back a reply. "I will be there, as long as nobody tries to ban Christmas lights." "Do not give them ideas," Tom responded, followed by a laughing emoji. That evening, I drove to the community center for the meeting. The parking lot was perfectly maintained, clear of ice and snow, safe to walk across without worry. Inside, about 15 homeowners had gathered, chatting pleasantly about holiday plans and decoration ideas. Linda called the meeting to order with none of Sharon's pretentious ceremony. "Thanks for coming, everyone. This should be quick. We just need to vote on whether to put up the community Christmas tree by the entrance sign and whether to allow residents to start putting up decorations this weekend. Any restrictions on the decorations?" Janet asked, a hint of concern in her voice, just the usual. Nothing offensive, nothing that creates a safety hazard or light pollution issue for neighbors, basic common sense stuff. No 7-foot inflatable Santas blocking the sidewalk. Linda grinned. Beyond that, decorate however you want. The relief in the room was palpable. This was how an HOA should function. Reasonable rules, reasonably applied, with respect for homeowners' autonomy and common sense. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. We voted unanimously to put up the community tree and to allow early decorating. Tom gave a brief update on the HOA's finances, which were healthy now that we were not spending money on frivolous lawsuits. Linda mentioned they were getting quotes for spring landscaping services and asked for input on what plantings people wanted to see. As we were wrapping up, Craig Roberts raised his hand. He was one of the board members who had voted with Sharon to maintain the salt ban, and he had been quiet for months after the lawsuit disaster. "I just want to say something," Craig began, looking uncomfortable. "I owe a lot of you an apology. I supported Sharon's salt ban because I did not think it through carefully enough. I should have listened when people raised safety concerns. I'm sorry for my part in that whole mess." The room was silent for a moment. Then Robert Hayes spoke up from the back. "Apology accepted, Craig. We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." Several people nodded in agreement. Craig looked relieved, and the meeting ended on that note of reconciliation. Walking back to my car, I reflected on how much had changed in 1 year. A ridiculous policy had sparked a legal battle that ultimately led to positive reforms. An abusive HOA president had been held accountable for her negligence. A community that had been divided by petty rules and vindictive enforcement was now functioning in harmony under reasonable leadership. My phone rang as I was driving home. It was my sister Emily calling from her place in Cincinnati. "Hey Andrew, I heard you finally resolved that crazy HOA lawsuit," she said. "Mom told me about it. That woman actually sued you for her own stupidity." "She did. It did not go well for her." "I bet not. Are you going to write about this somewhere? It is the kind of story that goes viral. HOA president bans salt, breaks arm on ice, sues homeowners who used salt." I laughed. "I have thought about it. Maybe I will write it down someday as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach." "You should. People need to know they can fight back against unreasonable HOA rules. Too many people just accept whatever their board dictates." That was the biggest lesson I learned. These boards have authority, but it is not unlimited. They answer to the homeowners, not the other way around. We talked for a few more minutes before Emily had to go. I pulled into my driveway, noting with satisfaction that it was still clear and ice-free from the calcium chloride I had applied that morning. Inside my house, I made dinner and settled in for a quiet evening. The television news was covering the latest winter storm forecast for the following week. The meteorologist warned of significant ice accumulation and advised everyone to stock up on ice melt and prepare for hazardous conditions. I thought about Sharon watching that same forecast, remembering her broken arm and the lawsuit that had cost her $15,000 and her position of power. I wondered if she ever admitted to herself that she had been wrong, or if she still blamed everyone else for the consequences of her own bad decision. Probably the latter, I decided. People like Sharon rarely accept responsibility for their actions. But at least she could not hurt anyone else with her policies anymore. The new HOA board would keep the community safe and functional, and if they ever tried to implement something as absurd as a winter salt ban, the homeowners now knew they had the power to push back. The following week brought the predicted ice storm. I was prepared with plenty of calcium chloride, a good snow shovel, and the secure knowledge that I could maintain my property safely without fear of fines or lawsuits. The storm hit on a Wednesday evening, coating everything in a thick layer of ice overnight. Thursday morning, I was outside early, chipping away at the ice and spreading ice melt. My neighbors were doing the same, creating a symphony of scraping shovels and scattered ice melt granules. The community pulled together, with younger residents helping elderly neighbors clear their walkways. Tom Martinez organized an impromptu snow removal crew, and about 8 of us spent the morning making sure everyone's property was safe and accessible. We cleared Robert Hayes' driveway and walkway. We helped the Chens, who were struggling with their newborn twins and could not get outside easily. We made sure every mailbox was accessible and every sidewalk was passable. The HOA's professional snow service cleared the common areas efficiently. By noon, Willowbrook Estates was safe and functional despite the severe ice storm. It was what a community should look like: neighbors helping neighbors, reasonable rules applied with common sense, and leadership that prioritized safety over aesthetics. I was finishing up at Robert's house when Sharon's Mercedes SUV drove past. She slowed down, watching us work, her expression unreadable behind her sunglasses. Then she accelerated and continued down the street toward her house. "Think she has learned her lesson?" Robert asked, following my gaze. "I doubt it, but at least she cannot force her lessons on the rest of us anymore," Robert chuckled. "Amen to that. Thanks for the help, Andrew. I could not have managed this on my own." That is what neighbors are for. I went home satisfied with the morning's work. My phone buzzed with a message from Linda Wu. "Community Appreciation Cookout this Saturday at the center, weather permitting. Come celebrate making it through another winter storm safely. Hot dogs and hamburgers provided. Bring a side dish to share." This was the kind of HOA activity I could support. Community building, not community harassment. I replied that I would be there and offered to bring potato salad. Saturday arrived with clear skies and temperatures in the high 30s, perfect for an outdoor gathering if you dressed warmly. The community center's pavilion area was bustling with activity when I arrived. Grills were smoking, children were playing in the remaining snow, and neighbors were chatting and laughing. Linda Wu was coordinating everything with effortless efficiency. Tom Martinez was manning one of the grills. Maria had set up a drinks table with hot chocolate and coffee. Janet was organizing the side dishes people had brought. It was exactly what a neighborhood gathering should be. Sharon was not there, unsurprisingly. Her absence was noted but not discussed. We had all moved on from the drama of the previous year. I found myself talking with Craig Roberts, who was grilling hot dogs with Tom. We discussed spring lawn care and whether the HOA should organize a community garage sale. Normal, boring, wonderful HOA topics that did not involve lawsuits or broken bones. "You know," Craig said after a while, "I have been on this board for 4 years, and this is the first time I have actually enjoyed it. Sharon made everything so contentious and difficult. She treated every minor issue like a crisis and every disagreement like a personal attack." "Why did you support her policies if you felt that way?" I asked, curious rather than accusatory. Craig sighed. "Honestly, because it was easier than arguing with her. Sharon could make your life miserable if you crossed her. She would find violations on your property, she would make snide comments at meetings, she would turn other board members against you. It was exhausting. I know that is not an excuse, but that is the truth. I appreciate the honesty. And I am glad you are finding the board work more enjoyable now. Night and day difference. Linda listens to people. She compromises. She treats homeowners like adults instead of children who need to be controlled. That is how leadership should work. The cookout lasted into the early evening. As the sun set and the temperature dropped, people started heading home. I helped clean up, hauling trash bags to the dumpster and folding tables. Linda approached as I was loading the last table into the storage shed. "Andrew, I want to thank you for everything you did last year," she said. "Fighting Sharon's salt ban was not easy, and you took a lot of the heat for organizing the opposition. But you were right, and you potentially saved people from serious injuries. I just did what made sense. I could not stand by and watch people get hurt because of a stupid rule." That attitude is exactly what this community needs. Would you consider running for the board in the next election? We need people like you making decisions. I considered the offer. A year ago, I would have refused immediately. I moved to Willowbrook Estates for a quiet suburban life, not to get involved in neighborhood politics. But the experience with Sharon had taught me that good people need to step up and participate, or bad people will fill the vacuum. "Let me think about it," I said. "When is the next election?" "Not until next spring, so you have time to decide. But I hope you will say yes. You have good judgment and you are not afraid to stand up for what is right." Driving home that night, I thought about Linda's offer. Being on the HOA board meant meetings and responsibilities, and dealing with people's complaints about trivial matters. It also meant having a voice in decisions that affected my community and ensuring that future boards would not repeat Sharon's mistakes. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had made my decision. I would run for the board when elections came around. Someone needed to be the voice of reason and common sense, and I was willing to step up. The winter eventually gave way to spring. The ice and snow melted, revealing the lawns and gardens that had been buried for months. The decorative stones along the sidewalks that Sharon had been so concerned about were mostly fine, with only minor damage in a few areas where salt had pooled. The landscaping company came through and replaced the affected stones at minimal cost. In April, I saw Sharon at the grocery store for the first time since the settlement. We ended up in the same checkout line, and there was no avoiding each other. She looked older than I remembered, with new lines around her eyes and mouth. Her left arm, the one she had broken, moved stiffly. "Hello, Sharon," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Andrew." She did not meet my eyes, focusing instead on loading her groceries onto the conveyor belt. We stood in awkward silence as the line moved forward. Finally, as I was about to check out and escape the uncomfortable encounter, Sharon spoke quietly. "I suppose you are happy about how everything turned out." "I am not happy you got hurt," I said honestly. "I am happy the community is safer now." She nodded slightly, still not looking at me. "I thought I was doing the right thing. The landscaping damage was real, I know, but safety has to come first. There were better ways to handle it." "Yes, there were." She paid for her groceries and left without another word. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. Sharon had learned a hard lesson about the limits of authority and the consequences of putting pride above safety. Whether she would apply that lesson in the future remained to be seen, but at least she could not abuse her position in our HOA anymore. Spring turned to summer, and life in Willowbrook Estates settled into a pleasant routine. The new HOA board continued to function smoothly, handling minor disputes and maintenance issues with competence and fairness. Property values were stable. Crime was low. The neighborhood was, in short, exactly what a suburban community should be. I spent my summer working in my garden, attending the occasional community event, and preparing for a potential board run the following spring. Tom Martinez was coaching me on HOA procedures and governance, sharing insights from his first months as vice president. The key is remembering that we serve the homeowners, not the other way around, Tom explained one evening over beers in his backyard. Every decision should be guided by what is best for the community as a whole, not what satisfies someone's ego or aesthetic preferences. Seems obvious when you say it that way. You would think, but people get on these boards and suddenly they are drunk on the tiny bit of power they have. They forget they are volunteers managing a neighborhood association, not executives running a corporation. Like Sharon. Exactly like Sharon. She treated the HOA presidency like she was a CEO and we were all her employees. That mindset is toxic to community governance. I filed away these lessons, knowing they would be valuable if I joined the board. The more I learned about HOA operations, the more I realized how much Sharon had distorted normal procedures to consolidate her own authority. August brought another surprise. Sharon and her husband put their house up for sale. The listing went up on a Thursday, and by Saturday the neighborhood was buzzing with the news. Some people were relieved to see her go. Others felt she was being driven out unfairly. I had mixed feelings myself. Janet came over that weekend to discuss it. "Did you hear Sharon is moving?" "I saw the for sale sign." "Where are they going?" According to Patricia Dennison, who is still friends with Sharon, they are moving to a condo in Dublin. No HOA, just a simple property management company that handles maintenance. Probably for the best. She clearly was not happy here anymore. "Do you feel bad? Like maybe we pushed her out?" I thought about that question carefully. We held her accountable for a policy that created dangerous conditions and for a frivolous lawsuit. She chose to leave rather than live in a community where she no longer has power over people. That is her choice, not something we forced on her. Janet nodded slowly. "I guess you are right. It is just weird how it all turned out. One stupid rule about salt, and a year later she is selling her house and moving away. Actions have consequences. Sharon learned that lesson the hard way. Sharon's house sold quickly to a young family with 2 kids and a friendly golden retriever. They introduced themselves to the neighbors, attended the HOA welcome meeting, and quickly became part of the community fabric. It was as if Sharon had never existed, her brief reign as HOA tyrant already fading into neighborhood legend. Fall arrived with beautiful foliage and crisp temperatures. I officially filed my candidacy for the HOA board in October, as elections were scheduled for early December to take effect in January. 2 other homeowners also filed, making it a 3-way race for 2 open seats. The other candidates were Maria Martinez and a newer resident named David Park, who worked as an accountant and wanted to help with the HOA's financial planning. The election process was refreshingly civil. We each submitted brief candidate statements for the newsletter. We attended a candidates forum where homeowners could ask questions. We outlined our visions for the community and our priorities if elected. My platform was simple. Continue the reasonable governance that Linda's board had established. Prioritize safety and community well-being over aesthetic perfection. Maintain open communication with homeowners and encourage participation in decision-making. Keep dues low while ensuring proper maintenance of common areas. The election was held on the first Saturday in December. Homeowners could vote in person at the community center or submit ballots by mail. Turnout was strong, with over 60% of households participating. Maria Martinez and I won the 2 open seats decisively. David Park came in a close third and was gracious in defeat, offering to help with financial matters even though he was not elected. I took my seat on the HOA board in January, exactly 2 years after Sharon's ridiculous salt ban letter had started the whole saga. My first meeting as a board member was professional and efficient. We covered routine maintenance issues, approved the annual budget, and discussed plans for spring improvements to the community center playground. There were no dramatic confrontations, no absurd policy proposals, no threats of fines or lawsuits, just a group of volunteers working together to manage a neighborhood association competently and fairly. After the meeting, Linda pulled me aside. "How does it feel to be on the other side of the table?" "Boring, in the best possible way." "If every meeting is like this, I will be very happy." That is the goal. Community governance should be boring. When it gets exciting, that usually means something has gone wrong. I served on the HOA board for the next 3 years, eventually becoming vice president in my second term. During that time, we implemented several positive changes. We established a hardship fund to help homeowners facing financial difficulties with their dues. We organized community events that brought neighbors together. We updated the outdated and overly restrictive covenants to reflect modern lifestyles while maintaining property values. Most importantly, we never forgot the lessons of Sharon's salt ban. Every policy proposal was evaluated through the lens of reasonableness and necessity. Every enforcement decision considered both the rule and the circumstances. Every homeowner was treated with respect and dignity. The salt ban itself became a cautionary tale within HOA governance circles in Ohio. Maria Martinez wrote an article about the case for a property law journal, using it as an example of HOA overreach and the importance of balancing authority with responsibility. The article was widely cited and helped inform other HOAs about the dangers of implementing unreasonable restrictions. As for Sharon Bartlett, I heard occasional updates through the neighborhood grapevine. She apparently lived quietly in her condo in Dublin, working as a real estate agent and staying far away from any HOA involvement. Whether she reflected on her time as Willowbrook Estates president or learned anything from the experience, I never knew. We never spoke again after that encounter at the grocery store. Looking back on the entire experience years later, I realized how much I had grown from that confrontation. I learned to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult and expensive. I learned that authority figures are not always correct, and that challenging unreasonable rules is sometimes necessary. I learned the value of community solidarity and the importance of good governance. Most importantly, I learned that homeowners associations do not have to be the nightmares of petty tyranny and absurd rules that populate internet forums and horror stories. With reasonable people making sensible decisions in good faith, an HOA can be a positive force that maintains property values, provides services, and builds community connections. But that positive outcome requires vigilance. It requires homeowners to pay attention, participate in elections, attend meetings, and speak up when policies are unreasonable. It requires board members to remember they are servants of the community, not rulers of it. It requires everyone to balance individual rights with collective responsibilities. The salt ban controversy taught our entire community these lessons. In that sense, Sharon's overreach and subsequent downfall served a valuable purpose. We learned what not to do and how to govern ourselves properly. The price was high: a broken arm, legal battles, and $15,000, but the lessons endured. On a cold December evening, 5 years after that first absurd letter about salt, I stood in my driveway spreading calcium chloride ice melt after a significant snowstorm. The familiar white granules scattered across the concrete, already working their chemical magic on the ice. My neighbors were doing the same, creating safe access to their homes without fear of fines or harassment. I looked around at the community we had built, or rather rebuilt, after Sharon's departure. Kids played safely in yards where walkways were properly maintained. Elderly residents accessed their homes without fear of falling on ice. The mailbox area was clear and safe, maintained by professional snow removal services hired by a competent HOA board. This was how it was supposed to be. Simple, safe, sensible. A neighborhood where people could live their lives without drama or absurdity, where rules served practical purposes rather than feeding someone's ego, where community meant mutual support rather than mutual suspicion. My phone buzzed with a message from the current HOA president, a retired teacher named Barbara Mills who had taken over when Linda moved out of state for a new job. Storm cleanup looking good. Great work, everyone. Hot chocolate at the community center tomorrow afternoon if anyone wants to warm up and chat. I smiled and replied that I would be there. This was the kind of HOA communication that mattered, bringing people together rather than threatening them apart. As I finished salting my driveway and headed back inside to warmth and safety, I thought one last time about Sharon Bartlett and her ridiculous salt ban. She had set out to impose her will on a community and ended up losing her authority, her money, and her home. The irony of her slipping on the very ice her policy created would never stop being darkly amusing. But more than amusement, I felt gratitude. Sharon's overreach had forced me and my neighbors to stand up and fight for common sense. That fight had made us stronger, more engaged, and more committed to good governance. Her failure had created space for better leadership to emerge. In the end, the HOA story that began with a ban on salt and ended with a lawsuit over ice taught us all invaluable lessons about power, responsibility, and community. Those lessons would shape Willowbrook Estates for years to come, ensuring that future boards would govern wisely and future homeowners would live safely. And every winter, when the snow fell and the ice formed, we would remember why we spread salt on our driveways despite what any HOA might say. Because safety matters more than decorative stones, and common sense matters more than rigid rules. That simple truth, paid for with a broken arm and $15,000, was Sharon Bartlett's unwitting gift to our community. We accepted it gratefully and moved forward, building the neighborhood we deserved rather than the one she tried to impose.